The courtroom was suffocating, filled with whispers, heavy silence, and the weight of judgment pressing down on every breath. Mehrunisa stood before the judge, her knees trembling, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles turned white. The moment stretched endlessly as though time itself had frozen to witness her downfall. Then the words came, cold, sharp, and merciless. Life imprisonment. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, and the walls seemed to close in on her. The world spun violently before her eyes, and she collapsed at the rostrum, unable to bear the crushing weight of the verdict. In that instant, she knew her life had been stolen from her, not by strangers, but by the very people she had once trusted to protect her. Summoning the last of her strength, she turned her head toward the benches where her father and brother sat. For a fleeting moment, she searched their eyes for compassion, for the faintest glimmer of loyalty. Instead, she was met with faces carved in stone, filled with disdain rather than sympathy. Their silence screamed louder than any accusation. It was as though she had ceased to exist, as though the bond of blood had been erased. Her lips trembled as she tried to call out to them, desperate for acknowledgement, desperate to remind them that she was their daughter, their sister. But before her voice could escape, they rose from their seats. Without a word, without a glance, they walked out of the courtroom, leaving her broken and abandoned. That betrayal cut deeper than the sentence itself. Something inside her shattered irreparably. The bailiff stepped forward, fastening heavy iron cuffs around her wrists. She flinched at the cold touch of the chains, but the officer showed no emotion. To him, she was no longer a young woman pleading for her life. She was simply another prisoner to be processed, another case number on a list. As she was dragged forward, a black cloth was thrown over her face to shield her from the sea of flashing cameras waiting outside. Reporters shouted questions, microphones pressed forward, and the roar of voices clashed against her silence. Inside the suffocating darkness of the cloth, her tears fell freely. The noise outside was deafening, yet within her heart there was only emptiness. Every step toward the prison gates felt like a step away from humanity itself. She knew that beyond those walls lay a world she had never imagined, a world where her name, her dignity, and her identity would be stripped away. And yet, in that darkness, one fragile truth echoed in her soul. She had lost her family, her freedom, her future, but not her God. The iron gates of the central prison groaned open, swallowing Mehrunisa into a world far removed from anything she had ever known. The chains around her wrists clinked with every hesitant step, announcing her arrival like a cruel anthem. The officer dragging her forward did not spare a glance at the tears streaming down her face. To him, she was already reduced to nothing more than another inmate, a body to be locked away, a number in the system. The moment she crossed the threshold, a suffocating air surrounded her. The prison was alive, but not with warmth or human connection. It breathed with hostility, despair, and the cold order of dominance. The walls were high and damp, smelling of rust and decay. Inside the long corridors, women in identical white uniforms watched her with predatory eyes. Their stares were hard, seasoned by years of pain, punishment, and survival. Some smirked, others whispered, but all of them looked at her as though she were fresh prey. Her first encounter with the jailer left no room for hope. A tall, broad woman entered the cell block with the authority of someone who ruled absolutely. Her eyes swept over Mehrunisa with disdain before she barked, "From today, you are not Mehrunisa. You are 322. Remember it well. Your past name, your family, your worth, none of it exists here. You belong to me now, and in this place, my word is law." The words struck like whips. Stripped of her identity in an instant, Mehrunisa felt her spirit bend under the weight of this brutal reality. But the humiliation did not end there. The jailer's sharp fingers tangled into her long, silky hair, pulling her head back with merciless force. "Look at you," she sneered, crying like an innocent, pretending as if you've never sinned. "These pretty locks of yours won't last. You think you're special? You think you'll walk around here like a queen?" At her command, a constable appeared. With a mocking smile, the jailer announced, "Cut it all." Not a strand should remain, Mehrunisa's heart sank. She begged them not to touch her hair, the one part of her she had always cherished, but her pleas only earned her a violent slap that stung across her cheek. Her sobs echoed through the hallway as the blades sheared through her thick hair, leaving her scalp bare and exposed. When the last strand fell, she stared at the cold floor, watching her identity scattered in pieces at her feet. The jailer laughed, her voice echoing through the cell. This is only the beginning, 322. Learn quickly. This is my world now, and in my world you have no dignity left to protect. The cell door slammed shut with a metallic thud that echoed through Merunisa's bones. The tiny space smelled of dampness, iron, and something sour that clung to the air. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the cracked floor, unsure whether to sit or stand, afraid of what might be crawling there. In the corner sat another woman, her head lowered, her shadow merging with the darkness. When Meronisa stepped inside, the woman finally looked up. Her scarred upper lip curved into a disturbing smile, and her bloodshot eyes glimmered with something both mocking and sinister. "What's your name, girl?" she asked in a coarse voice. "And what sin dragged you here?" Before Meronisa could form a reply, the jailer's heavy boots echoed in the hallway. She swung the door open, glaring with contempt. "No names here," the jailer barked. "This one is 322, nothing more, nothing less. If she dares to forget it, she will pay." With that, she left, her cruel laughter trailing behind. The scarred woman's smirk deepened. 322, she whispered mockingly, son. "Welcome to hell." Night came quickly, and with it, a terror Meronisa had never imagined. The dim bulb above her cell flickered weakly, leaving shadows to dance across the filthy floor. Suddenly, small creatures darted from one corner to another. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks, but soon the unmistakable squeaks of rats filled the silence. Large crickets chirped relentlessly, their shrill notes echoing through the cold stone walls. The sound gnawed at her nerves. She pulled her knees to her chest, pressing herself against the wall, but the creatures grew bolder, running across the cell as if they too were its rightful owners. A sharp squeal escaped her lips when one brushed near her foot. Trembling, she covered her face with her hands, trying to shut it all out, but the noises only grew louder. Her cellmate suddenly sat up, annoyed. "Are you mad? Why are you screaming like a child? They're only rats. They've been here longer than us." Her tone was harsh, dismissive, as though living with vermin had become second nature. Meronisa wanted to scream again, to tell her she wasn't used to this filth, that she was still human. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she sank back, silent tears running down her cheeks, her body shivering under the thin, dirty blanket thrown on the bed. That night, sleep refused to come. Every sound, every rustle, every shadow reminded her she no longer belonged to the world outside. She had stepped into another existence, one where fear was constant, dignity was stripped away, and survival was the only rule. By the time dawn crept in through the iron bars, Merunisa's eyes burned from exhaustion. She knew then that the night was only a taste of what awaited her in this place. When dawn broke, the clang of keys and the bark of a guard's voice pulled Merunisa out of her restless daze. She hadn't slept, yet her body ached as though she had carried mountains in her dreams. The jailer did not appear that morning. Instead, it was an older inmate with a weathered face and piercing eyes who came to her cell. She walked with a slow but commanding gait, and the guards treated her with an odd kind of respect. Without introduction, she pointed at Meronisa and said flatly, 322, you'll wash the dishes from now on. That's your duty. Confusion struck Meronisa. Who was this woman to give orders? The answer came quickly from a whisper behind her. She's been here longer than most. The jailer trusts her. When she speaks, it's as if the jailer herself has spoken. Soon, Meronisa found herself in a dim, grimy corner of the prison, where mountains of dirty metal plates were stacked in impossible heaps. The stench of rotting food clung to the air, and her stomach turned at the sight of leftover scraps swarming with flies. She stared at the pile numb until two women entered, already scrubbing the endless dishes. To her shock, both of them were visibly pregnant. Their swollen bellies pressed against the thin fabric of their uniforms, and sweat dripped down their brows as they bent over the dirty water. Hesitant but desperate for answers, Meronisa whispered, "How can you work like this? How can you endure such weight, such labor, in your condition?" One of the women paused, turning her tired eyes toward her. A bitter smile curved across her lips. "You'll learn soon enough," she said cryptically. "This place has its own rules, its own ways. Today you wash dishes. Tomorrow you'll understand why we are like this." The words sent a chill through Meronisa, a warning more terrifying than any threat. She wanted to press for answers, but before she could, a guard appeared, holding a heavy stick. Her voice cut like a whip. No talking. Work. If the plates aren't clean, your backs will bleed. The hours stretched endlessly. Her soft hands burned from the rough surfaces of the dishes. Her wrists ached, and the sour smell clung to her skin. Time blurred into a haze of scrubbing, rinsing, stacking, only to start again. By midday, her body was screaming for rest, but there was none. She realized with horror that this wasn't just a morning chore. It would last all day, repeated after every meal, without pause. When she finally returned to her cell, trembling from exhaustion, her cellmate smirked knowingly. See, 322, the rats and crickets won't bother you tonight. You'll be too tired to notice. Meronisa lowered herself onto the bed, her muscles throbbing, her spirit heavy. The woman was right. Fear had been replaced with pain and pain with numbness. And yet, in her heart, one question refused to rest. Why were women here carrying children? That night, exhaustion did not bring peace. Instead, memories from the world outside the prison returned with a cruel sharpness. As Meronisa lay on the thin mattress, her mind drifted to the home she once knew, to the moments that shaped the very tragedy she now lived. She remembered how her father never wanted daughters. For years, his eyes carried nothing but resentment whenever he looked at her and her sisters. Their existence was a burden he never hid. Life in that house was suffocating until the day a son was born. They named him Shan, and from that moment, everything changed. The bitterness in her father's heart melted into devotion for the boy. The sisters who once suffered neglect now witnessed their brother receiving every ounce of love, care, and privilege denied to them. The favoritism was glaring. Meronisa and her sisters attended a modest public school, while Shan was enrolled in an elite private academy. They wore worn-out shoes and shared second-hand books, but Shan never had to ask twice for expensive toys, new clothes, or the latest gadgets. Even when his demands bordered on the absurd, they were met without hesitation. Yet, despite this imbalance, the sisters adored him. To them, he was their pride, their honor, a symbol of everything they could never be. They gave up their own small comforts just to see him smile. But blind affection turned Shan into something dangerous. With each year, his temper grew sharper, his arrogance bolder. He picked fights on the streets, came home bloodied from brawls, and dismissed every warning. Neighbors complained, teachers reported, yet their father defended him fiercely, crushing anyone who dared speak against his son. Their mother tried to reason with Shan, but he silenced her cruelly, accusing her of being jealous of his freedom. Then came the day that altered everything. A stranger arrived at their door, an older boy, furious, his voice trembling with rage. He accused Shan of destroying his expensive motorbike and harassing his sister with his reckless friends. His words cut deep, filled with humiliation and threat. Meronisa, frightened of escalation, lied instinctively. She told the young man Shan wasn't home, hoping to avoid bloodshed. But Shan heard it all. When the visitor left, Shan's face twisted with rage. He stormed into their father's room, pulled out a revolver from the drawer, and declared, "How dare he knock on our door and speak against me?" He will pay. Merunisa's heart pounded. She tried to stop him, begged him to think, but he shoved past her and left. Fear gripped her legs as she followed him down the street. By the time she caught up, it was too late. The confrontation had spiraled. The argument escalated into shouts, and before her eyes, Shan's trembling hand pulled the trigger. A gunshot cracked through the air. The young man collapsed to the ground, blood spreading across his shirt, his eyes wide with disbelief. Meronisa froze, horror consuming her. In that moment, she knew their lives would never be the same again. The gunshot still echoed in her mind. The sight of the lifeless boy sprawled on the ground haunted her even as Shan clung to her, trembling and weeping. He had not meant to kill. At least, that was what she told herself. He only wanted to intimidate, to show his strength. But death had arrived swiftly, and once it appeared, there was no undoing it. Neighbors poured out of their houses, gasps and cries filling the street. Blood pooled beneath the young man's body. Within minutes, the police were called, and the weight of the crime fell upon their doorstep. Mehronisa's father arrived, his face pale yet calculating. She rushed to him, sobbing, blurting the truth of what had just unfolded. But before her words could reach anyone else, his hand silenced her, covering her mouth. "Not a word," he hissed. "Not another sound." That night, as neighbors whispered and the police made their inquiries, her father spun a different story. According to him, the boy had been infatuated with Mehronisa. He claimed she had taken money from him under the pretense of affection, and when he pressed her for commitment, she had turned on him in anger and shot him. Shock rippled through the gathering. People stared at Maronisa with wide eyes, disbelief painted on their faces. She stood numb, struggling to understand what was happening. In that moment, she realized the unbearable truth. Her father had chosen. To save his son, he was ready to sacrifice his daughter. The walls of her world crumbled. She pleaded with him later, begging him to reconsider, insisting she had nothing to do with the crime. But he only glared at her, his words cutting like a blade. One daughter can be sacrificed. A son cannot. The trial was swift and merciless. Her father promised he would secure the best lawyer for her defense. Yet when the day came, the man standing beside her in court was cheap, inexperienced, and careless. Her forced confession, extracted under her father's pressure, sealed her fate before the trial even began. Every word she uttered against her will became a nail in the coffin of her freedom. The judge listened, weighed the evidence, and announced the sentence: life imprisonment. As the gavel struck, she turned desperately toward her family. Her father and Sean stood together, eyes hard, faces devoid of recognition. They left the courtroom as though she were a stranger. Her mother remained absent, bound by silence and obedience, never once daring to meet her daughter's eyes. That was the moment Maronisa truly understood what betrayal meant, not from strangers, but from blood. Her freedom was stolen, her innocence buried, and her life exchanged for her brother's sins. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months. The prison routine carved itself into Maronisa's body, waking before dawn, washing endless dishes, scrubbing floors until her fingers cracked, enduring insults and beatings from guards who delighted in her suffering. Yet beneath the routine, she sensed a darker current, something unspoken that hung in the air like a curse. She saw it in the pregnant women who scrubbed dishes beside her, in their hollow eyes that never dared to tell the full truth. One night, the truth came for her. She was half asleep on the hard mattress when the cell door creaked open. A shadow slipped inside, the older inmate who held power over everyone. Her eyes glimmered with a cold, knowing light. "Come with me," she whispered, quietly. Fear clutched Maronisa's chest, but something in the woman's tone left no room for refusal. She followed through the silent corridor, her bare feet dragging against the cold stone. They reached a hidden door near the far wall of the prison yard. With a key she should never have possessed, the woman unlocked it. Beyond lay the outside world, cloaked in darkness. It was there that Maronisa's nightmare truly began. She was handed over to a man whose presence was suffocating, his wealth and power radiating through every movement. His hands, his voice, his eyes left no doubt of what was expected of her. She tried to resist, tried to summon strength, but her pleas meant nothing. That night, her dignity was torn away, her innocence crushed beneath a system designed to use her body as currency. When she was dragged back to her cell before dawn, she could not even cry. Her tears felt stolen, just like everything else. The older inmate leaned close, her voice low and sharp. "Tell no one. If you speak, they will say you tried to escape. You'll be beaten until you beg for death. Keep silent. 322. It's the only way to survive." From that night onward, silence became her shield. The cycle repeated. Different men, different nights, always the same violation. Maronisa realized with horror that the prison was not just a cage for criminals, it was a marketplace. Women were traded like objects, their bodies used and discarded, their pregnancies brushed off as mere inconveniences. Each return to her cell hollowed her further. She stopped screaming, stopped fighting, because there was no point. The walls did not care, the guards were complicit, and the world outside had long abandoned her. In the stillness of those nights, one truth sank deep into her bones. Prison was not her punishment. It was her execution, drawn out slowly, day by day. The months that followed were a blur of shame, exhaustion, and silent torment. Every night she lived in dread, uncertain if the cell door would open again, uncertain which faceless man she would be handed to next. Her voice, once filled with protests and pleas, grew quieter with each passing day. By the second month, her body began to betray her. Morning sickness came like a thief, nausea twisting her stomach until she could hardly stand. She knew then her worst fear had come true. She was carrying a child. At first, panic consumed her. First, panic? She could not bear the thought of motherhood born out of cruelty. But, strangely, the night visits stopped once her condition was discovered. The same woman who ruled the inmates ensured she was kept hidden from the jailer's watchful eye. Mehrunisa realized that her pregnancy, rather than being a shield, was a carefully managed secret. She was not spared out of mercy. She was protected because her child had already become part of the cycle, part of the unspoken trade that thrived in silence. Her body grew heavier as the months rolled on. She labored through her duties, scrubbing, washing, enduring the aches, until her swollen feet could carry her no longer. Some women looked at her with pity, others with envy, for they knew she had temporarily escaped the horrors of being sent outside. Yet for Mehrunisa, every kick inside her womb was a reminder of chains she could not break. 9 months later, the night of her delivery arrived. She was not taken to a hospital nor given medical care from a trained hand. Instead, a few experienced inmates gathered in the corner of a cell, whispering hurried instructions as they prepared for the birth. The air was thick with fear, sweat, and urgency. Mehrunisa's screams echoed against the stone walls, swallowed quickly by the damp night. After hours of unbearable pain, the cries of a newborn pierced the silence. Her daughter. For one fleeting moment, hope flared in her chest. She reached out, desperate to hold the tiny life she had brought into this world, but the women turned away. The baby was whisked from her arms before she even saw her face clearly. Her questions, her pleas, her cries, none were answered. Within minutes, the child disappeared into the darkness, carried away through channels she could not see. Lying there on the cold floor, drenched in sweat and tears, Mehrunisa felt a grief unlike any she had ever known. She was a mother without a child, a vessel emptied by cruelty. The silence that followed the newborn's cries was unbearable, a void that carved itself deep into her soul. That night, something inside her broke beyond repair. She had not only lost her freedom, she had lost the one bond that could have given her reason to endure. The days after childbirth blurred into a haze of emptiness. Mehrunisa's body had not yet recovered from the ordeal, yet she was pushed back into the routine of scrubbing, cleaning, and laboring. But the true wound was not in her aching body, it was in her hollow arms. She would wake in the night with the phantom feeling of her child resting against her chest, only to find the space cold and empty. Her daughter had vanished into the shadows, and the silence surrounding her disappearance was louder than any scream. Every time Mehrunisa asked where her baby was, she was silenced with threats. The older inmate, the same one who had dragged her through the hidden door, leaned close with a voice sharp as glass. "Keep quiet. Your child is gone. If you speak of this again, you'll be accused of attempting to escape, and you'll never see daylight again." Her words dripped with menace, yet behind them lay an undeniable truth. This system was bigger than any single guard or prisoner. It was a machine of exploitation with women like Mehrunisa as its fuel. Soon, she noticed the same cycle repeating with others. Women vanished during the night and returned hollow-eyed by morning. Months later, swollen bellies revealed what had been forced upon them. Then came the hurried births in shadowed corners, the brief wails of newborns, and the swift disappearance of those fragile lives. The pattern was undeniable. The prison was not just a place of punishment, it was a place of trafficking, where bodies and children alike were commodities. Mehrunisa felt herself changing. The defiance that once burned in her heart began to fade, replaced by a numb acceptance. She stopped protesting, stopped asking questions. When the guards barked orders, she obeyed. When inmates mocked her, she stayed silent. When her cellmate laughed cruelly and reminded her she was no longer Mehrunisa, but only 322, she lowered her head and said nothing. Her name, her past, her dignity, all of it had been stripped away until she was nothing more than a number in the endless ledger of broken souls. The silence was not just forced upon her, it became her armor. She learned to swallow her grief, to bury her questions, to walk with bowed shoulders and lowered eyes. Yet deep inside, a storm raged. A mother's ache, a daughter's betrayal, a woman's crushed spirit. She carried it quietly, knowing there was no one left to hear her cries. In that prison, survival meant silence, and silence, she realized, was its own kind of death. Years slipped through the cracks of prison walls like sand falling through trembling fingers. Days turned into seasons, seasons into years, and yet for Mehrunisa, time was frozen in that single moment she was condemned. She had been sentenced to life, but in truth, she had been sentenced to silence, to abandonment, to the slow erosion of everything that made her human. Her father never came. Her mother never dared. Her sisters, once her companions in childhood, were swallowed by the same silence that had taken her. And Shan, the brother for whom she bore this punishment, never once appeared, never once sent a letter, never once uttered her name. She had been erased from their lives, as though she were the guilty one, as though her sacrifice had been nothing more than a stain they wished forgotten. The prison itself aged her. The endless labor hardened her hands, the beatings toughened her skin, but her heart remained raw, wounded, and unhealed. She often wondered if her daughter, the child stolen from her arms before she could even hold her, was somewhere alive, or if she too had been discarded like a secret too dangerous to keep. That unanswered question became the sharpest blade she carried in her soul. She had learned to move through the prison like a shadow, unnoticed, unchallenged. To the guards, she was only 322. To the inmates, she was another broken woman among many. But inside, she held a truth too heavy to contain. She had not killed. She had not sinned. She had been betrayed by blood, by law, by a system that preyed on the weak. For years, she kept her story buried, threatened into silence, terrified that speaking out would bring only more pain. But silence became unbearable. The weight of her truth pressed against her chest until she could no longer breathe under it. And so, when a chance came, when a sympathetic writer visited the prison, offering to listen, she let the words pour out. Each sentence felt like bleeding, each memory a wound reopening, yet, for the first time, her voice reached beyond the walls that caged her. She ended her story not with hope, but with a question that echoed into the void. Would she ever see freedom again? Would she ever find the daughter who had been torn from her arms? Or would she die nameless, a number engraved on a prison roster, her cries forever unheard? As the writer left, pen filled with her pain, Mehrunisa sat in the dim cell, her bald head bowed, her frail hands clasped tightly. The rats still scurried, the crickets still sang, but she no longer flinched. She had grown used to them. What she could never grow used to was the silence of justice, the silence of family, the silence of a world that had abandoned her.